Hello friends! Today I have two creepy stories for you again on my channel. Share your thoughts on each of them in the comments. Well, let's get started. In July 2016, two fishermen were enjoying a leisurely day of fishing on the Swan River, which flows through Perth, Australia. However, luck wasn't on their side that day. Not a single fish was caught. As their boredom grew, they suddenly noticed something unusual. A suitcase floating on the surface of the river quickly caught their attention. The fishermen decided to bring their boat closer and retrieve the object. As soon as they opened the suitcase, they were hit by a sharp, revolting smell. It was immediately clear that something was very wrong, and indeed the first thing they saw inside was a human leg. Realizing the gravity of the situation, the fishermen quickly called the police. When investigators arrived at the scene and examined the suitcase's contents, they found the body of a woman, curled up inside. The condition of the body was horrific. There were numerous signs of severe trauma on the victim's body and head, with the skull being particularly damaged, shattered by at least 25 blows from a heavy blunt object. The cause of death was obvious: brutal assault. But the strangeness didn't end there. Alongside the body in the suitcase, investigators found fragments of ceramic tiles, the kind typically used to line bathroom or kitchen walls. This raised an immediate question: what connection could these tiles have to the crime? The police encountered a significant challenge even before the full investigation could begin. The identity of the victim remained unknown for 2 months after the body was discovered. The only information investigators had was that the victim was a woman of Asian descent. Certain details, such as a tattoo on her eyebrows and evidence of dental work on her upper front teeth, could have helped with identification. Additionally, at the time of the body's discovery, the woman was dressed in a black vest and a t-shirt with a Tokyo Disneyland logo. Despite these clues, the police were unable to match the victim to anyone in the missing persons database over those 2 months. The available information was simply not enough. However, one troubling thought persisted. None of the woman's relatives had reported her missing. This prompted the police to create a composite sketch, which they distributed through the media. Finally, 2 months later, in September, the Perth police received their first missing persons report. The report was filed by 25-year-old Tiffany Van, who said she had been unable to contact her 57-year-old mother, Annabelle Chen, for some time. Tiffany had recently graduated from a university in Melbourne, which is about 3,000 kilometers from Perth. The last time she spoke to her mother was on June 30th, just days before the body of the Asian woman was found in the Swan River on July 2nd. Upon hearing this information, the police decided to share the details of the discovered body with Tiffany. They mentioned the tattoo on the eyebrows and the Disneyland logo on the t-shirt. They also showed her the composite sketch, but Tiffany wasn't sure if it was her mother. However, when she was allowed to view the body in person, she screamed in horror, unable to believe what she was seeing. It was indeed her mother, Annabelle Chen. From that moment, the investigation picked up speed. Tiffany recalled that the last time she saw her mother, Annabelle was leaving in a car with an unfamiliar Asian man. However, Tiffany didn't know who this man was. The police immediately identified this man as the primary suspect and focused all their efforts on finding him. So, who was Annabelle Chen? Originally from Singapore, she married Ban Pin 16 years ago, and together they had a daughter, Tiffany. However, the marriage didn't last long. They divorced in 1999, and Annabelle moved to Australia with her daughter. Despite the move, Annabelle continued to live a luxurious life, even in Singapore. Her ex-husband, Ban Pin, was a successful businessman, and after the divorce, Annabelle received a substantial alimony payment of 1,500,000 Australian dollars. This amount was equivalent to over 100 billion won, making it incredibly substantial. Thanks to such a large alimony payment, Annabelle was able to provide a comfortable life for herself and her daughter in Australia. They settled in Mosman Park, one of Perth's most prestigious neighborhoods. However, after the divorce and 12 years of living with her daughter, In 2011, Tiffany left to attend university in another city, leaving Annabelle alone in a large house. A single, wealthy, middle-aged woman. This made Annabelle a potentially easy target for criminals. The police began to suspect that greed might have been the motive for the murder and directed their investigation accordingly. But the further they delved into the case, the more strange details emerged. First and foremost, the identity of the mysterious Asian man last seen with Annabelle remained a mystery. If he had been someone she knew, surely someone in Annabelle's circle would have recognized him. Yet the police couldn't find anyone who could identify him. Moreover, let's recall the ceramic tile fragments found with Annabelle's body. Upon closer inspection, it was revealed that these tiles came from her own home, specifically from the bathroom. This indicated that the crime scene was her house. When the police conducted a more thorough search, they discovered traces of blood on the bedroom wall. However, curiously, the mattress was surprisingly clean and appeared to have been recently replaced. All these clues led the police to conclude that the crime took place in Annabelle's home. Consequently, suspicion naturally fell on those who had easy access to her house. Among them was Tiffany. The police decided to question Tiffany about why she had waited 2 months to report her mother missing. Even considering that she lived far away due to her studies, she still should have kept in touch with her mother. Tiffany explained that she believed her mother had gone on a long trip to Switzerland. Tiffany claimed that her mother couldn't attend her graduation ceremony because of this extended trip. However, the police decided to verify her story by looking at photos from the graduation. In one of the pictures, they noticed something unexpected. Among the attendees was Ban Pin, Annabelle's ex-husband and Tiffany's father, who was supposed to be living in Singapore. On the surface, there was nothing unusual about a father attending his daughter's graduation, but the detail that raised suspicions was this. The graduation took place in early August, at a time when Annabelle was already dead. Tiffany had stated that her mother was away on a trip, yet only her father, who had specifically traveled from Singapore, was present at the ceremony. This deepened the police's suspicions. They began to wonder, could Ban Pin have killed his ex-wife for her wealth? After all, he had paid Annabelle a substantial alimony following their divorce and was facing financial difficulties. Although they were no longer legally connected, and Annabelle's assets wouldn't have gone to Ban Pin after her death, everything changed if their daughter Tiffany became the heir. If Ban Pin had maintained a good relationship with his daughter, he might have counted on her to help him gain access to part of the inheritance. The police decided to interrogate Ban Pin. After the graduation ceremony, he returned to Singapore, but as soon as he learned about Annabelle's death, he immediately flew back to Australia. This was a crucial opportunity for the police. During the interrogation, Ban Pin vehemently denied any involvement in the murder. He argued, "If I had killed my ex-wife, why would I return to Australia? By staying in Singapore, I could have easily avoided the investigation and covered my tracks. But I came here on my own. That just doesn't make sense if I were guilty." He explained that his return was motivated by concern for his daughter, who had been left without a mother. However, the police began to consider another possibility. What if Tiffany had killed her mother? This angle also became a focus of the investigation. It was revealed that shortly before the graduation ceremony, Tiffany had a serious argument with her mother. The conflict arose because Tiffany had invited her father to the graduation. Annabelle was furious when she discovered that her daughter had been secretly maintaining contact with her ex-husband and was strongly opposed to his presence at the ceremony. But Tiffany disagreed with her mother and stood her ground firmly. This created a tense atmosphere between them, and the conflict was quite apparent. When the police decided to question Tiffany, her reaction was very cautious. She was visibly scared and asked, "Are you suspecting me?" But then she made a shocking confession. It turned out that the conflict with her mother had indeed occurred over the invitation of her father to the graduation ceremony. When Ban Pin learned about this, he decided that he needed to speak with Annabelle in person. As a result, he flew from Singapore to Australia, and on June 30th, 2016, they met at Annabelle's house. According to Tiffany, a heated conversation ensued between her parents, which quickly escalated into an argument. Tiffany was downstairs in the living room, but the shouting of her parents could be heard even from there. Ban Pin tried to calm down the enraged Annabelle, but her anger only intensified, and she began yelling even louder. Suddenly, there was a loud, dull thud, followed by silence throughout the house. Worried, Tiffany called upstairs, "Is everything okay?" To which her father responded, "Tiffany, don't come up. I'll take care of it." After some time, Ban Pin came down to the living room alone, with tears in his eyes, and confessed to his daughter that he had killed her mother, Annabelle. He explained that it all started when an enraged Annabelle grabbed a heavy decorative bell from the table and struck him on the head. In response, he wrestled the bell out of her hands and hit her on the head several times, which ultimately led to her death. Tiffany was stunned by her father's confession. She hesitated. Should she report this to the police? But the thought of her father ending up behind bars made her abandon that idea. In that moment, she decided that she had to protect him and chose not to report what had happened. A short while later, Tiffany decided to help her father cover up the crime. She meticulously washed the clothes stained with her mother's blood and replaced the mattress in the bedroom. She also removed all traces of her father's presence in the house. Meanwhile, Ban Pin placed Annabelle's body in a suitcase, planning to throw it into the river. However, he realized that the body could easily resurface, so he broke tiles in the bathroom and added the fragments to the suitcase to weigh it down. While Tiffany cleaned up the bloody evidence in the house, her father headed to the river to dispose of the body. After everything was done, Ban Pin strongly advised his daughter to act as if nothing had happened in order to avoid suspicion. For the next 2 months, despite knowing her mother was dead, Tiffany continued to send messages to Annabelle's phone, pretending that her mother was still alive. "Mom, when are you coming back? I miss you. Please get in touch with me." This was blatantly hypocritical behavior. According to Tiffany, she was acting on her father's instructions. But then an unexpected twist occurred. When the police confronted Ban Pin with Tiffany's confession, he was extremely surprised. "My daughter said that?" he exclaimed in confusion, before cautiously adding, "No, it was the other way around. It was my daughter Tiffany who is the real culprit." He claimed that the argument that night did not take place between him and Annabelle, but rather between Annabelle and Tiffany. The reason for the fight was the same. Annabelle had found out that Tiffany had been maintaining contact with her father and had invited him to the graduation, which deeply upset her. The argument escalated into a physical confrontation. The two began throwing objects at each other, and at one point, Tiffany grabbed the heavy decorative bell and hurled it at her mother. Annabelle was struck in the head but did not immediately lose consciousness. Enraged, she shouted at Tiffany, "You are no longer my daughter." In a fit of rage, Tiffany stormed out of the house. But the next day, after her anger had somewhat subsided and she began to worry about her mother's well-being, she returned home. However, upon returning, she discovered that Annabelle had already died from a brain hemorrhage. Shocked and terrified, Tiffany immediately contacted her father, who quickly flew from Singapore to Australia that same day, June 30th, to help his daughter. Ban Pin decided to protect his daughter, and, to cover up the crime, he chose to dispose of Annabelle's body by throwing it into the river. He also mentioned that during this process, he accidentally fell into the water and lost his glasses. Now, father and daughter found themselves in an extremely difficult situation, accusing each other of the murder. It was clear that one of them was lying, but it was up to the court to determine who. The bonds of their family seemed completely shattered, and during the trial, each of them stood their ground, continuing to blame the other. The trial was long and arduous, with both sides presenting their evidence and testimonies in an attempt to prove their innocence. Unfortunately, the details of the trial were not fully covered in the Australian press, leaving many aspects unclear. However, the verdict was unequivocal. Ban Pin was found guilty of murdering his ex-wife, Annabelle Chen, and was sentenced to 20 years in prison. The court determined that he was the primary perpetrator, based on the fact that he had a stronger motive, related to financial difficulties and disputes over property that had arisen between him and Annabelle. It was also revealed that after Annabelle's death, money had been transferred from her account to Ban Pin's, further supporting the theory of financial motives. Moreover, the analysis of the injuries on Annabelle's head revealed that they had been inflicted with a heavy object at least 25 times. Given the extent of the damage, the court concluded that the perpetrator was likely physically stronger than the victim, which also pointed to Ban Pin. Additionally, both Tiffany and her father's testimonies agreed on one crucial point. They both claimed that it was Ban Pin who disposed of Annabelle's body by throwing it into the river. This was compelling evidence of his guilt. As a result, Tiffany was fully acquitted of the murder charge, but was found guilty of evidence tampering and received a sentence of 4 years and 10 months in prison. Despite the conclusion of the trial, debates over who was truly responsible for the crime did not cease. Many Australians questioned whether Tiffany could really be entirely innocent. After all, she knew about her mother's death, yet she still attended the graduation ceremony, where she was photographed with her father, smiling for the camera. Friends noted that she seemed unusually happy that day. Could this behavior be explained solely by her desire to follow her father's advice to act as if everything were normal? These doubts fueled suspicions that Tiffany might have been involved in her mother's murder, and that her complete acquittal on this charge might not have been entirely just. But the story didn't end there. In 2019, after serving 3 years of her sentence, Tiffany was released on parole. This sparked a new wave of discussions, especially after it was revealed that she inherited her mother's multi-million-dollar estate. According to Australian law, a person convicted of murder cannot inherit from their victim. However, since Tiffany was not convicted of the murder, her right to the inheritance remained intact. This reignited heated debates. Was Tiffany truly uninvolved in the murder? Opinions were divided, but there was no legal basis to revoke her inheritance. In the last photograph you see, Tiffany is pictured at her graduation ceremony with her father, just days after her mother's murder. Is she smiling because she successfully concealed her involvement, or simply because she was following her father's advice to act as if nothing had happened? That question remains open. Considering all the circumstances, does Tiffany truly deserve her mother's inheritance? Who really killed Annabelle, her ex-husband, or her own daughter? The answers to these questions may never be fully known. On March 3, 2008, in a small village located in Hoyam-dong, within the city of Yangju, Gyeonggi Province, a group of school children wandered nervously along the edge of an alleyway, well past midnight. Their behavior was anxious and suspicious. A local resident, noticing the children's unease, asked, "What's going on, kids?" The children quickly asked for help, explaining that they needed to pass through the alley to get home, but someone was lying on the ground in their path. The resident shone his flashlight into the dark corner, immediately revealing a blood-soaked scene. In the midst of this horrific sight was indeed a human body. The police soon arrived at the scene. The body, lying on the side of the road, was so brutally mutilated that it was unrecognizable. Even more shocking was the identity of the victim. It was none other than 14-year-old schoolgirl Kang Soo-yeon. Her body bore 13 stab wounds inflicted by a sharp weapon, including injuries to her neck, abdomen, and chest. The fatal wound to her neck had caused massive bleeding. Kang Soo-yeon lived just 10 steps away from where her body was found. She resided in the house with her mother and older brother. The crime scene was alarmingly close to their home. Kang Soo-yeon was an ordinary schoolgirl who had recently entered middle school. Her mother, a divorced woman, was raising the children alone. She worked at a nearby cafe and was often so busy that she frequently missed meals. In those instances, Kang Soo-yeon would cook and bring food to her mother at work. She was truly a kind and caring daughter. But why was such a sweet girl brutally murdered right on her doorstep? On the day of the murder, Kang Soo-yeon's mother had gone to work as usual. Her brother was also away from home. After school, Kang Soo-yeon returned home and was alone until late evening. As the police began their investigation, they first checked the surveillance footage from cameras installed in the village. On one of them, a man was seen loitering near the crime scene. He turned out to be a foreigner. There were many dormitories for foreign workers in the area. The house where Kang Soo-yeon lived was also close to one of these dormitories. The house consisted of 3 interconnected containers that served as living quarters. The first container was home to Kang Soo-yeon and her family, while the other 2 were occupied by Filipino workers from a nearby factory. When the police identified a suspect, a special team of 15 investigators was formed to conduct a thorough investigation of all the nearby dormitories where foreign workers lived. Soon, they discovered a small but crucial piece of evidence: a pair of sneakers at the doorstep of one of the dormitories with tiny, almost imperceptible traces of blood. Additionally, a sink in that dormitory also tested positive for blood. 3 Filipino workers from a textile factory lived there. The police suspected that one of them might be involved in the crime and began interrogations. They focused particularly on the owner of the sneakers, as it was revealed that the blood on them belonged to the murdered Kang Soo-yeon. The police appeared to be close to solving the case. However, when they began questioning the owner of the sneakers, he adamantly denied his involvement, claiming that he was innocent and unjustly accused. This might have seemed like typical behavior for a suspect, especially when the evidence appeared so damning. But then he made an unexpected statement. On the day of the crime, his younger brother had visited the dormitory. Moreover, after his brother's visit, a knife went missing from the kitchen. This became a significant clue. The younger brother, 31-year-old Filipino worker Biligas Chunparel, also worked at the same textile factory. Furthermore, another Filipino residing in the same dormitory made a key statement. That evening, he saw Biligas leaving the premises in a hurry, holding something. The police immediately suspected Biligas of the murder. 3 days after the crime, on March 10th at 11:30 p.m., the police arrested Biligas in the dormitory at the textile factory. Biligas arrived in Korea 7 years ago in 2001 on a tourist visa. However, he had remained in the country illegally ever since. During this time, he secured a job at a factory where he earned a steady income. Having lived in Korea for a significant period, he became proficient in the language and could communicate in Korean without any issues. But as soon as the investigation began, his behavior changed dramatically. He started claiming that he did not understand Korean and refused to cooperate with the police. Despite this, serious evidence had been gathered against him. Multiple cuts were found on his hands, likely sustained during the crime. Similar cuts were found on Kang Soo-yeon's hands, which she had received while trying to defend herself. In his dormitory, the police also found 5 blood-stained items. In addition, surveillance footage captured him near the crime scene. Under the pressure of this evidence, Biligas finally confessed to the crime. His confession led the police to a river where they found the discarded knife used in the murder. Biligas was found and arrested, but he insisted that the murder had been accidental, committed in a fit of rage. He claimed that the 14-year-old Kang Soo-yeon had insulted him, triggering his sudden outburst of anger. The police did not believe his story and continued an intense interrogation that lasted all night. Finally, the next day, March 11th around 1 p.m., Biligas fully disclosed the truth about what had happened. On the morning of March 7, 2008, after a night shift, he went to a club in the Dongdaecheon area with his friends, where they continued drinking and partying until noon. According to plan, he was supposed to return to the factory for the evening shift, but instead, he headed to a residential area located about 3 kilometers from the factory. It was there, near the dormitory where his older brother lived, that Kang Soo-yeon's home was located. A little after 7 p.m., Biligas wandered around the container housing. When the dogs outside began barking, Kang Soo-yeon, who was home alone reading a manhwa, stepped outside to see what was happening. She calmed the dogs and returned to the house. It was at that moment that Biligas realized the girl was alone. After she closed the door, Biligas went to his brother's dormitory, grabbed a knife from the kitchen, and returned to Kang Soo-yeon's house. Knocking on the door, he waited for her to open it. Kang Soo-yeon recognized him, as she had seen him several times before, and this likely lowered her guard. But suddenly, Billigus grabbed her by the neck and threatened her with the knife. She was defenseless and unable to resist as he dragged her out of the house and led her to a field about 30 meters away. There, he attempted to assault her, placing the knife on the ground. This was her chance, and Kang Soo-yeon tried to escape, but it was too difficult for a 14-year-old girl to overpower an adult man. Killer caught up with her and grabbed her by the hair, then stabbed her in the back. But even at that moment, Kang Soo-yeon didn't give up. She screamed and tried to run toward her home, but it was a secluded rural area where no one could hear her cries. She managed to reach the residential area, but Billigus caught her again. To silence her screams, he shoved his hand into her mouth, then turned her around and delivered multiple stabs to her neck, abdomen, and chest. The girl fell to the ground, bleeding profusely, but even that wasn't enough for him. In a fit of rage, he began kicking her repeatedly. This happened around 7:40 p.m. Leaving her body by the roadside, Billigus rushed back to his brother's dormitory, where he hastily washed the blood off his hands and changed into his brother's clothes. It was at this point that the blood traces were left on the sneakers at the entrance. After this, he called a taxi to return to his dormitory. At that moment, Billigus was still holding the knife he had used to commit the murder. One of his brother's friends, who lived in the same dormitory, noticed Billigus leaving the house. Billigus asked him not to tell his brother that he had been there and quickly got into a taxi. Later, he threw the knife into a nearby river, attempting to destroy the evidence. It was a horrifying moment. But was this murder really accidental? During the investigation, it was revealed that Billigus frequently visited his brother's dormitory and had likely noticed 14-year-old Kang Soo-yeon, who lived in the neighboring container, several times before. On the day of the crime, he deliberately waited for her mother to leave for work, confirmed that the girl was alone, and then immediately attacked her. Despite all these facts, Billigus continued to insist that the murder was accidental, claiming that the girl had insulted him. His lawyer added that Billigus, as an illegal immigrant who had been living in Korea for a long time, was under constant emotional stress. Killer argued that he was in a state of emotional stress due to his illegal status in Korea, and that the murder happened accidentally because he had consumed too much alcohol that day. But could these justifications be accepted? The court was merciless. In April 2008, the court sentenced Billigus to life imprisonment, noting that his attempt to rape a minor, which resulted in her murder, required his isolation from society. This sentence was ultimately upheld, and Billigus was sent to Daejeon prison. There were rumors of his possible deportation back to the Philippines, but they turned out to be false. The murder of a 14-year-old girl by an illegal immigrant was a horrific crime, yet it did not attract much media attention. The reason for this was that several other high-profile crimes occurred in Korea around the same time. The country was shaken by cases such as the serial killings committed by former professional baseball player Lee Ho-seon, and the abduction and murder of 2 schoolgirls in Anyang, which diverted public attention away from Billigus's case. When the crime reconstruction involving Billigus was conducted, none of the major media outlets showed interest in covering the event. Some believed this was because the perpetrator was a foreign worker, and reporting on this could have sparked a wave of anti-immigrant sentiment. However, in my opinion, this event should not have been silenced. On the contrary, it should have been publicly discussed to prompt measures for better control of such situations. The only publication that covered this case in detail was the local newspaper Gyeongbukbu Ilbo. After the material was published, information about the crime began to spread through online communities, and only then did major media outlets start paying attention to the case. Kang Soo-yeon's mother, seeking justice, handed over her diary to the local newspaper and actively collaborated with journalists to tell the world about the injustice her daughter had suffered. But as with all similar cases, the arrest of the criminal did not put an end to the tragedy. If even one person remembers this unjust death and shares the family's anger, it might bring them a small measure of comfort in their loss. Otherwise, the death of this 14-year-old girl will simply fade into obscurity, devoid of any significance. Was Billigus a man with sexual deviance that led him to commit this heinous crime? Or perhaps he had committed similar crimes in his home country, of which no one was aware? Unfortunately, there is no evidence or data on this matter, as this case did not receive the attention it deserved and was not subject to a thorough investigation. I do not want this case to simply be forgotten as just another crime.